comes in the realm of during the reign of Solomon, King Solomon of the Old Testament, when his brother asks to be given the maidservant who had taken care of his dying father. All right, King David. And he approaches Bathsheba and says, "Would you ask my brother King Solomon if I may take as a wife this woman who had cared for David in his old age?" Now, the sacred text tells us that she had no sexual relationship with David, but that because of his age and infirmity and his body temperature, he couldn't regulate. He got cold all the time. She would kind of crawl under the sheets with him and keep him warm. Right? She was a hot water bottle.
There you go.
Okay, but it was above board, so to speak.
Okay,
There's nothing inappropriate about it. Nevertheless, just in virtue of her physical proximity to his bed, Solomon understood that this was a political play. This wasn't about love. The younger brother wanted the girl to legitimize his claim to the throne. All right? That's how much the Israelites would have thought about degrees of consanguinity, right? As if she had somehow another been the consort of the previous king. And so Solomon responds and says, he might as well ask for the throne next, off with his head.
Wow.
He recognized it as sedition. Right? So that's kind of the sense, right? They take very seriously this idea. You've been connected to somebody by marriage. Now all of a sudden, that's a sacred bond. You can't violate that, even after the death of the party to whom you had previously been connected. Right? That's what Paul's dealing with in 1 Corinthians. That's the kind of example of the porneia situation that Acts 15 and St. Paul both insist have to apply to the Gentile world. Again, go back to the logic of the ban on prostitution. Why? Because you're married to Christ. Your body has become one flesh with Christ through the nuptial union we have through baptism. All right, as you are nuptially united to your spouse through the sacrament of matrimony. All right, go look at Ephesians chapter 5, which is the kind of classic text on the sacrament of marriage. And the model is that as the holiness of Christ flows into his body, the church, right? Likewise, husband and wife are to sanctify one another. 1 Corinthians 6, dealing with another issue, St. Paul says the husband is sanctified through the wife is sanctified through the husband. Right? So that intense but mystical bond of sanctification and redemption flowing from Christ into the church is mirrored in the dynamism of a sacramental marriage. All right? And so that's why the bond is so intense. Just as Christ never abandons the church, the spouse can never abandon one another. All right? And the allowance for civil divorce is only when you have somebody whose marriage is invalid in virtue of having violated one of these marriage taboos from the Levitical code. Okay? Mokeia is the word for adultery. Porneia is the word for this, the Levitical structures on marital and sexual relationships. Now, how does the Catholic Church run with all this stuff? The Catholic Church says, okay, look, even if you take the position that adultery is in view in Matthew 19 in the exception clause, right, which I don't, but even if you take that position, Jesus makes no allowances for remarriage. St. Paul makes no allowances for remarriage. A woman must not divorce her husband, but if she does, let her remain unmarried. And so the Catholic Church's position has always been, look, a valid marriage is indissoluble by any power on heaven or earth. I mean, God himself joined this together, let man not separate it. If you're married, you're married. That's the end of the story. Let's say something intolerable happens and your spouse becomes a murderer and comes after you with an axe. This happened to somebody I know, actually. Or they're threatening to shoot you, or their life becomes so scandalous that the children's moral formation is just drastically vitiated. All right, and it becomes absolutely morally or physically necessary to physically separate. And you may even have to obtain a civil divorce to invoke the powers of the state to protect you or your family. All right, Catholic Church says, yes, sometimes you have to do that. But even then, remarriage is not in view. Not in view if it's a valid marriage. It may not be a valid marriage, but if it's a valid marriage, there's no such thing as Christian divorce and remarriage. Can't happen.
Okay. Dave, that's it. Dave, thank you so much for your